G'day, bird. Oh, g'day, bird nerds. How are you? All right, another relaxed live stream. Replaying today a fantastic conversation I had in, I believe it was 2021 October with Holly Parsons from the Urban Birds program at Birdlife Australia, Birds in Backyards. Mick Callan, who we featured yesterday and the day before, talking about his nest boxes. Dan Fuller, podcast host from Plants Grow Here podcast. Now I'm just going to get it going, and we can relax. The rules are simple. Let me know where you are. That's always nice. And if you've got any questions or comments, if I know the answers, I'll address them as we go. Otherwise, we'll take them on board for when Holly and Mick are back talking to me live in the new year. But here we go. Drop off there. Start here. Plants Grow Here. It's Habitech Australia, and it's Birds in Backyards. Hello, I'm Grant Williams, and this is our second little How Can We Help Wildlife Along panel discussion. Hello, Holly.
Hey, Grant. Thanks for having me back.
I'll have you back anytime. I've told you that. Hello, Dan.
G'day, Grant. Thanks again, mate. Much appreciate second invite.
Hello, Ned. I mean, Mick. How are you, Mick Callan? Habitech Australia.
Yeah, I'm well, thanks, Grant. Pleasure to be with you.
Now, Mick, nobody else has had the pleasure of a detailed introduction from you, because I've held back the bird emergency Mick Callan episode until we finish up today, so that anyone who's been watching today can then zip over to the bird emergency and download the Hollow Crisis episode. Mick, tell us about Mick and tell us about Habitech Australia.
Yeah, so Habitech Australia is a company that I've set up with another ecologist, Carl Tippler, and we are in the business of manufacturing nest boxes, what we are terming the first real revolution in nest boxes, because we've developed something that is really thermally stable, very closely equivalent to natural tree hollows, and has much greater longevity in the field than nearly all of the products that are out there at present. So pretty excited about that. There's been a lot of work and research go into it. It's come out of a thesis that I wrote as part of an honours project, and a lot of time spent developing it through 3D printing and trialling different things, and just coming back with iterations until we finally got it right.
Ripper. Now, Holly, I've titled Mick's episode with me as the Hollow Crisis, and I tend to overblow things because I've called my podcast The Bird Emergency. But why am I concerned? Why is Mick concerned? What's the state of play when it comes to hollows for our wildlife? Why are they so important?
Well, there's a huge number of wildlife, not only birds, mammals, reptiles, you name it, use tree hollows for breeding or for roosting. In terms of birds, it's something like 15% of Australia's bird population will use a hollow at some point in their life cycle. So that's quite a significant number of species, particularly when we're moving into an urban suburban setting, even and through sort of regional and rural areas as well. Hollows are very much in short supply. It takes a huge number of years to form tree hollows in Australia, and I'm sure Dan can tell us a bit about the process that goes into forming those hollows. But that often makes them considered dangerous, and they get removed. So when you have such a lag, of 80, 100 years till a tree is big enough and old enough to form a hollow. It means that there is this huge suite of species that are just waiting for an opportunity and are facing increasing competition for a very limited resource.
Dan, how do hollows form in general? We're all used to seeing. We're all used to seeing people. Let me get this right. In Australia, the hollows that we're used to seeing are in eucalypts. They form hollows in a particular way. Are all of our common mature garden trees likely to form hollows in the same way that eucalypts do?
It's a good question. Not entirely sure. What are you talking about there with the eucalypts? Is it the oil or what's going on?
No. Well, the eucalypts have that bit where the branch. I think we talked about it even last week a little bit, didn't we? With the branch bark ridge and the collar, and that the physiology is that the branch kind of is stuck into this receptacle, and that. Yeah. So
they do. Go on.
I was just wondering, will an oak tree or a birch or something like that come up with the same kind of hollow as we see in eucalypts?
Bit thrown up by the question, could be wrong here, but my understanding is that yes, it probably will be similar. I'm not sure about, there could be a chemical process there as to the oils and stuff in a eucalypt. I'm not sure about that. But all trees will have what we're calling here is it's like it'll have a branch collar. I think eucalypts do have, I remember something about the branch bark ridge with eucalypts. I can't remember exactly what that is, but yeah, they will usually have, it's kind of made for a hollow because as that branch that's rotting dies into the mother branch, it sort of spreads that fungal rot into that mother branch. And so as that wood dies, something can come along and peck it out. Maybe a cockatoo will come and pull it out, or some other kind of a parrot, or it'll just rot fungally and just eventually maybe termites will dig it out or something like that, and it will form that hollow. But that's based on the biology of a tree as to the shape that hollow can make. Like you don't see hollows usually like midway through a branch. It'll be where there's a fork, one branch has died into another branch is generally. So what do you mean by the branch? Can you explain what you mean, Grant, there by the bark collar ridge there that you're talking about? Why eucalypts are different?
I don't know if I've got the terminology right, but I'm sure, Mick, you probably have seen this, especially with eucalypts, where the healthy part of the main tree keeps growing, but as the branch is shut down, like when a branch breaks off or something, the tree cuts off all supply of nutrient to it, and then that remaining wood, like you were mentioning before, can rot and decay, and insects can get into it, whatnot. But sometimes you can actually, after a period of a couple of years, you can actually pull it out, and you've got like this lovely little hollow that's just made, and that's just a function of the physiology of the tree. Now, I'm only familiar with it in eucalypts, corymbias and whatnot, but I wondered whether, well, Mick, you've been up on plenty of ropes having a look at these things. Is that common with a lot of the introduced trees? And the reason I'm interested is because in our cities, a lot of the mature trees are introduced species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my understanding is that eucalypts will support hollows for much longer periods than a lot of the exotic species we have in Australia, simply because of the nature of the eucalypt and the hardwood. So once those exotic trees that are softwood species come in and start rotting out, it leads to the failure of that tree much more rapidly than a eucalypt, which can develop hollows and still be standing for hundreds of years. And in terms of the hollow development in Australia, it's important to note that we are unique to many parts of the world that actually have hollow creating species, or primary hollow users, they're often termed as. So things such as woodpeckers will actively excavate hollows for themselves. We have nothing that does that in Australia. It requires damage to the bark or the cambial layer for fungal infection or some sort of disease to actually get into the heartwood and start rotting that out for hollow development to form in our eucalypts.
Is there a good hollow or is there a bad hollow?
There's a lack of hollows, which makes me think that they're all valuable. It's interesting. I think that Laura Rayner out of ANU had been doing some work about even the differences and preferences between different species of eucalypts and the sort of way they develop their hollows and the roughness inside and different features. So there's still a vast amount of information that we don't know. We're getting there slowly. There's a lot more publications coming out, it seems, year on year in terms of hollows and artificial habitat. But yeah, there's a long way to go before we really understand the detailed species requirements and even the different species of trees and how they're impacted and the different way they form hollows.
I think when you mentioned Laura Rayner there, Mick, I think she's been working on the selection of the superb parrot for the remnant trees in the paddocks in the Riverina. So that'd be a really good thing to follow up on. I can't remember the name of the student she was supervising who finished that project, but can you remember, Holly?
No, I'm not sure.
I think. Apologies for not remembering, but it was a really, really interesting bit of work. So, yeah, they are pretty fussy. That's the point, that not just any hollow will do. That's really what you've been concerned with, Mick. We'll come round to that in a minute or two. But, Holly, which birds that most people living in sort of cities and towns in Australia would be familiar with? Which birds are really dependent on hollows for nesting or for shelter?
Sure. So I guess the most common and probably the one people are most familiar with is the parrots. Okay, so all parrots will breed in hollows in urban areas or in nest boxes. Some of them can be even more flexible with that. We see rainbow lorikeets, nesting in palm trees and excavating little holes under the base of trees. And I think that really goes to that flexibility, which we talked a little bit about last week in terms of the urban winners being those birds that can be quite flexible with resources. And so the urban winners in terms of hollow nesters are things like rainbow lorikeets, galahs, sulphur-crested cockatoos, the ones that can take advantage of whatever hollows are around, be a little bit flexible in what sort of types they can tolerate, and being really cranky and bossy and taking over and making sure that they're the ones that are gaining those hollows. So for sure, it's the parrots that we see in urban spaces, but also owls. All our owls use hollows for nesting, and some of them, the majority of them, will use them for roosting as well. So these are hollows that are not only needed for, a window of a few months while they're breeding, but things that need to be available year round for boo-books or sooty owls and things as well. I guess, there's a whole range of them, but one that I always get a smile on my face when I think about is wood ducks. I love the thought of a duck in a tree. It's just a little bit weird, but very much a requirement. So wood ducks, those little brown ones that you see on the park lawns, are the ones that you find up in a tree, laying lots and lots of eggs with tiny little ducklings that do a little leap of faith to hit the ground and head off into the pond.
And for old people like me, they'd still be calling them.
Calling them what? Sorry, I missed that.
the main goose. Are any of you old enough to have the bird books that called them the main goose?
Mhm.
Maned goose. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was wondering about, Holly, was we're all pretty familiar with the birds that nest in hollows. But once upon a time, I interviewed your colleague, Tegan Douglas, and she was talking about the red-browed tree creeper. And I discovered that tree creepers roost in hollows. I didn't know that.
That's right. So, not a really common urban bird, unfortunately, but yeah, tree creepers will roost and spend some time in hollows throughout the year. Of course, the little pardalotes, gorgeous tiny little 10 and 11 gram birds will use tiny little hollows. There's a huge range of different birds that we've got that rely on different shapes and sizes of their hollows.
Are there many more that are roosting in hollows but not necessarily nesting in hollows?
No, look, it's mostly your owls and things like your tree creepers. They're kind of the ones that are the year round looking for that resource. The vast majority are nesting only.
Okay. Oh. Oh, I just got a horrible piece of sound. I hope no one.
Yeah, so did I.
Hopefully that will be with us for long. Dan, what are you seeing in horticulture? Because you're a working horticulturist. Is there an attitude that is growing where people are trying to retain hollow, or are people still removing any tree that's got any sign of decay?
Really good question. I think it definitely depends on who you talk to. On the internet, like the circles that I talk to on the internet are pretty eco-minded, so we tend to keep it in mind. But when I'm working on the ground, like in customers' yards, there will be a lot of people out there who just, cut out any dead wood, any sign of branch failure, cut it out. It might be an acreage and there's nothing around, but they're concerned about the safety of a branch failure, which is a lot of the time, like, these are acceptable risks that we have to take if we want trees and we want wildlife. We're just going to have to accept some sort of a risk. That's not to say if you've got a branch overhanging your carport or, maybe overhanging the playground where kids are in, half of the day, that's not an acceptable risk. But yeah, we have to mitigate these risks and think about it intelligently.
Now, that question was really based on an assumption that we're removing all the trees that are showing decay, and I was speaking more in an urban setting. But,
okay.
But Mick and Holly, what is happening to hollows in the broad landscape? Are all of our forestry and agricultural and then horticultural practices removing systematically hollows from the broader landscape?
Yeah, very much so. Particularly, we saw it about a decade ago in Queensland when they changed land clearing laws up there, and New South Wales followed suit a few years behind. And not as a country, but as individual states, that put us right up in the top of the world in terms of area of land clearing, which really shocks a lot of people when they hear that, and it should, because this is clearing that's going on legally within Australia and taking out huge numbers of old trees and whole vegetation communities. And we're not talking about, in many of these situations, people going through with chainsaws and taking down trees. We're talking about D9 bulldozers with chains just going through and taking out whole vegetation communities at once, a vast scale land clearing. The issue is that you can't replace that. And you can try to, you can revegetate, you can plant trees in other places. But when we're talking about hollows specifically and hollow using species, it's 100 years is generally accepted that you're looking at for hollow formation from a tree that's grown or planted. And to get things that are big enough for your cockatoos and owls and those sorts of things, you're looking at hundreds of years. So the number of hollows in this country is continuing to decline, and it's more than a 100-year problem. So anything that we're doing at the moment, we need to understand that we've got over 100 years before things can even begin to improve.
Holly?
Oh, look, I've got nothing else to add. I think Mick said it really brilliantly. That, and I guess that's where nest boxes in their various iterations can help. But I think we always have to remember that there's no substitution for big old growth trees. They perform many more important and complex roles aside from hollow nesting as well, and so conserving those needs to be a priority, and we can accent things with putting in nest boxes and in their various forms, but we need to be remember that conservation is really, really important.
But when someone's doing a development, or they're going to open up some more land for agriculture, or maybe start a new extend their sugarcane plantation or whatnot, don't they have to offset some land for wildlife?
Yes, and that is a very complex and very frustrating issue. Absolutely. The challenge is that whether the requirements are to offset that land and those resources so they're an equivalent, which often is not the case. So simply offsetting something doesn't replace automatically what has just been lost, unfortunately.
Mick, tell me about offsets.
Look, in a very simple sense, the worst of the legislation around offsets, it doesn't actually offset anything. So and this is a very basic example and probably one that doesn't really exist, but if you took 100 hectares of remnant vegetation on a property and said, we want to clear half of that, we'll protect the other half under a conservation covenant or something and fence that off, that other half is considered your offset. You haven't actually increased habitat anywhere else by simply fencing an area of existing vegetation under some legislation and some agreements. That can be considered your offset. So it's not even replacing what's lost. It's simply just protecting another area of similar veg type often.
So from what I'm gathering from my reading, the easiest way to spell offset is BS. So that's my political statement for the day.
Look, I would say that the idea of offsets that was first sort of thrown around by ecologists and environmental scientists was quite sound and was designed to offset land that genuinely would result in decent outcomes where it was essential to clear land. What I believe we've seen is that various governments and agencies have taken the opportunity to take what was decent science and say, don't worry, that gives us a ticket to clear land because we'll just use this offset and then make the rules so that it's workable for them.
All right, well, we've had 20 minutes of bad news. What can we do in a practical sense to provide, I nearly used the word rebuild, but I mean, we can't rebuild habitat easily, but we can ameliorate what's been lost. So who wants to start off first with the best thing we can do for hollow nesting or hollow roosting animals? That looks like you, Dan. You had your hand up. It's like I'm in school.
One for me.
Yes, Dan.
Well, you say the best thing. The best thing is to not cut down old trees if you can. So it's not always possible, but retain as much as you can. Secondly, nest boxes are good, but like Holly and Mick have said, they do have a short lifespan. Like 10 years is a pretty good life for a nest box. But when we're thinking tree time, we're actually thinking in terms of 100-year periods. So that's why Mick has a fantastic product that I think we're going to get into a little bit later, I'm hoping. But another thing you can do is you can actually cut hollows into a tree. Now, hardly anybody is actually qualified to do that, so I'm not telling everyone to go out there and do it. I'm certainly not qualified to do it. I'd be buying one of Mick's Habitech products. But I think the idea is you want to create a hollow with a chainsaw in a part of the tree that's not load-bearing. So let's say if you non-selectively cut a tree between forks, so it's not at a fork, and then you just want to cut perpendicular to that cut. So you're creating a bit of a, I guess like a bit of a tube inside of that arm. And that's not going to be load bearing or anything, so you're not going to have a weak part of that tree that's going to fall down. But like I said, yeah, no one, hardly anybody's qualified to do that. So please contact your local arborist if you want to try anything like that.
Now, there's a question / comment that's come on YouTube. Occasionally, I have tree hollows, branches or trunks that fall. I'd like to be able to reuse these. What is the means to refurbish them? And there's further 2 parts to get them reset in trees so they are the right size, the right condition, the right place. Is that one for you, Mick?
Yeah. I'd love to say there's a simple answer. It would require having a look at what species you've got, what sort of dimensions you have in that hollow, but definitely a good idea to reuse them. What I would say first and foremost is that hollows are critical habitat for a whole host of species. So Holly mentioned earlier, it's 15% of birds in Australia, and it's not just the birds, it's actually 15% of vertebrate fauna, other than the aquatic and marine stuff. So your terrestrial and boreal fauna, 15% of them use hollows. And they're not all species that get up in trees. A lot of those are your reptiles and mammals that will actually use hollows on the ground as shelter. So before I say, yes, go and get hollows and put them back in trees, if it's something that's recently come out, good idea. If it's something that you've found on the ground that's been there a long time, it's probably already providing important habitat for something. So that's sort of the start point.
Well, I hope that was a good start. Now, I did say to people that if they wanted to join in the studio and actually make a comment and we can see and hear them, that they were welcome to. So here's Lucas McKinnon. Hello, Lucas. Welcome aboard.
Hey, Luke.
Now, Luke, you've got, there we are, unmuted, yeah. So, now, Luke, hang on, have I muted you? No, you've got yourself muted there, Luke. Can you unmute yourself? Here's a lovely comment directed at you, I believe, Mick. Sweet Jesus. This is like the perfect evolution of the beard. So, yeah. Hello, Lucas. Now, there you are. You should be able to talk to us now.
Sorry, I don't have earphones. I'm trying to listen. I just got the message from Carl Tiffler that you were on, Mick, so I'm just logging in to see what you're talking about.
Oh. All good. Good stuff, Luke, I promise.
Luke, are you have you got a special interest in hollows?
Oh, yeah, I'm an ecologist, and I know about the work that Mick has been doing with the hollows. So I was just interested to see what the chat was about. Really, we install nest boxes as part of project developments as a consulting ecologist, but those tree augmented ones where they chop the plate out of the tree and install it look pretty groovy. But I've never done that level of hollow, attachment.
Well, it's fortuitous that you've jumped in, Lucas, because you're one of those people that will be doing the work when somebody is either doing a new development or looking at a land use change. Is that the kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, we do impact assessment, and often conditions of consent for impact assessment require replacement hollows, or which can be at any kind of level of discretion of the developer, I guess. So they can have a crappy old plywood box if they want, but a lot of this work that I know Mick's been working on, and with more durable and better thermo properties of the of hollows to get better occupancy rates is of interest to us, to make sure that the consent conditions are replacing habitat that's being removed, or providing something for a period of time until that habitat can be naturally replaced.
Okay, well that sounds pretty much like what we were sort of talking about. Like what I'm going to do is pop you on mute until we ask you another question, if you don't mind. Mick, what are the kind of customers is probably the wrong word, but who are the kind of people, the organisations that would be looking to make use of your product? And look, here's the perfect opportunity to actually give it a plug and tell us really what it is, bearing in mind that it came out of an interest you had and that you've done a thesis on it. So we're not just running an ad for you here.
No, no, that's correct. There's been a lot of work going into it, and it was all born out of myself and doing different work, and increasingly with birds, and particularly hollow obligate species, and realising that there were issues out there with tree hollows and species, particularly the ones of conservation concern, that really aren't recorded using timber nest boxes. I've run a few really large-scale projects using the chainsaw carved hollows, and they can be a fantastic part of the toolkit of going forward, keeping in mind that all of this work that we're doing in terms of tree hollows with the nest boxes and chainsaw hollows and various artificial habitats, it's all should just be seen for exactly what it is. We're trying to supplement the habitat for the next 100 or so years, while we should also be increasing the number of natural hollows in the field. So getting the revegetation back in place and protecting the trees that are already existing. But one of the big issues we saw prior to starting all that research was that the nest boxes don't have the longevity in the field that they need. And typically on those sort of offset projects, they're put up and they are set and forget. So in 10 years' time, if your boxes fail, you're looking at another 90, 100, 200 years before the natural hollows are replaced. So we wanted to create a product that lasted longer. And also there's mounting evidence to suggest that for a lot of the species that won't use timber nest boxes, it's because they don't match the thermal profiles of a natural hollow. They get hotter during hot events than ambient, and they get colder during the overnight coldest temperatures. Whereas tree hollows, natural tree hollows really buffer that fluctuation. And then the last part of it is that the natural tree hollows have a really high and very stable humidity, which can be important for eggs, but it can also be important for some of the mammals that aren't really thermoregulating yet until they're sort of more mature. So they're the problems that we aim to solve, and we really hit them across a lot of iterations and have come up with something pretty ugly originally that we were field testing, and then we've managed to get some really fantastic people involved in the engineering space to pretty up those products and have something that's appealing to both the fauna we're trying to protect as well as the customers that we're hoping will buy them.
Now, I thought I was a pretty well-informed and aware bird nerd right through my sort of junior years and when I was out there planting native gardens and trying actively to create habitat. But Dan, I want you to be honest, the same way I am about this issue. I had never, ever, ever considered the thermal properties of any nest box that I had hung anywhere ever. I had obsessed over the depth of the box and the size of the entry hole and all my considerations about pest species and invasion of unwanted pairs getting in there were all about those two things. How about you, Dan?
That's a really interesting point, Grant, because in nature we don't see these holes kind of appear overnight and then just stay the same size. What happens is it starts off as a little hole and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over like decades and decades. So when it's really small, you might have microbats in there, or you might have bees or something like that. Then when it gets a little bit bigger, then you might have something else. And just that life cycle of that hole is going to support a huge range of just various different life forms, whether that's birds, mammals, insects, reptiles, just like we've been saying. So, it's kind of like everything's evolved together. So that's how we have to really be thinking about things as like a system, like an ecosystem.
Holly, is that a common thing where people have not considered anything other than, like me, the depth or the size of the box, so that will rosellas use it, will lorikeets use it, will cockatoos use it, and the idea of the thermal properties, the regulatory properties of the box aren't considered?
Yeah, that's right. Just reiterating what Mick had said, that I think you're right. We don't, people want to build something and put it up and help nature, which is great, but it's always, unfortunately, a little bit more complex. And so we know, for example, with powerful owls, that's a project that we've had running for quite a while, researching them, and everybody wants to build a powerful owl nest box. And as yet, we haven't been able to crack the code on what makes a good powerful owl nest box. And so Dr. Beth Mott, that runs our Sydney project, has actually put some data loggers in artificial nest boxes, in tree hollows. She's got some out in some dead stags as well now. And same as what Mick said, you can see a huge fluctuation in these artificial boxes. They're just replicating what a powerful owl needs when it's looking for a suitable hollow. And so until we can crack that code and look at what those thermodynamic properties need to be, we won't have a successful powerful owl nest box. And I think it also comes back to, again, maybe people just not being aware that it's not only rainbow lorikeets that will use a nest box. There are this huge range of birds out there. So you don't need to automatically go with your traditional, medium-sized parrot box. That there are all sorts of wonderful shapes and sizes of nest boxes that are out there. And so rather than just going for the standard, building a parrot box and popping it up for a rainbow lorikeet when they are doing fine anyway, maybe we need to have a bit of a think about the type of bird that we want to be attracting into our nest box first and foremost, whether they're around in our area, and then looking up and seeing what sort of box that they might need before we put something together and put it up in our garden.
And the other thing to consider is that there are very small possums, there's medium-sized possums, there's big possums, there's bats, there's all kinds of bugs. There's so many things that can use hollows, and if we extend out the sort of definition that a hollow can be a crevice, can be a crack. Now, I've put another comment up that's come in from Kerrit Burreet. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Talking about storm drops, so it's good. So it is good manna gum, a variety of sizes. Trying to work out about saving these hollows rather than turn them to firewood. So info on that, best to target refurbishment. I'll just throw in one thing that I used to do. Whenever I found a hollow branch, and usually, maybe that you could get your hands around that size, I would just plug one end of it, and then I would wire it somewhere up in a tree. And it's not a box, but small birds or insects particularly can then make use of that. So I used to get very cranky whenever I saw anyone in my family or my friends burning things like that at barbecues and whatnot. Is that a strategy that is worth pursuing if you do come across fallen timber that is already hollowed out?
Absolutely. So that sort of thing is what you would call a spout hollow, and there's quite a few species, including some of the microbats, that will use spout hollows preferably. So plenty, a great idea. If you get much bigger ones, I've seen people cap them with tin and put them back in trees. You're really going to have issues with thermal properties if you're doing that. If you do want to cap them and get them back into trees, use a really good slab of timber if you can. The biggest challenge you're going to face is how to mount a big heavy log in a tree and do it safely and make sure it lasts. If you can come up with that, a solution to that challenge, then by all means play around and have a go. But whenever you're doing any of this sort of work, I think it's really critical to just have, when you're putting stuff up back in trees, make sure you monitor it, because if you're just attracting exotic species and increasing their numbers, you're doing much more harm than good.
Now, that's a point that we all wanted to bring up and talk about. Holly, which are the worst of the invasive feral birds that get into hollows when they're provided, and what are the strategies that people can use to try and deter them?
Oh, okay. So the two most common bird species that that are introduced that will take over nest boxes are your common or Indian miners, probably the most hated bird in Australia, and also your common starlings. They will get in as well. So they're both, small to medium-sized birds. They will take advantage of and squeeze into just about any hollow that they can. I think they tend to go for a typical parrot-type box. So there are some tips and techniques that you can try. Some people have used what's called a baffle at the front of a nest box, where it's basically a roof that goes out and then down over the hollow, with the theory being that the native bird will go up and in, but a miner won't. I've heard very mixed success. Sometimes people say that they're great and that's kept them out. Other people have said no, they just go in anyway. And then before we cover off on sort of maintaining, I'll also mention the other species to be careful of is not a bird, it's honeybees. So they will move into tree hollows and nest boxes as well. So don't try and deal with that invasion yourself. Get an apiarist on the phone to come and remove them for you. But they're sort of the top three non-native species that will have a go at a nest box or a hollow. And so I think, as Mick said, I guess one of the dangers of nest boxes is that people sort of think it's a weekend job, that they can build something, they can construct, they've put it up, they've helped. When we do need to, particularly in urban spaces, if it's on your private property, you take responsibility for that box. You put it up, you need to make sure that you are protecting it. And I'm getting a lot of feedback. So you need to make sure that you are looking after it and removing any invasives.
I've just muted Mick. I think it was coming through from Mick. Now, Mick, I'm going to bring you back online. Can you give us an idea of whether those baffles and whatnot are a good preventative measure in your experience from those ferals, those unwanted, those ugly brown birds getting in there?
Yeah, as Holly said, definitely mixed success with those. I think people really underestimate the ability of birds to learn, and not even individual birds, but birds across successive generations. So I think they was really good success with the baffles originally, and I think birds are starting, the invasive species are starting to overcome them a little bit. One of the interesting thing about both of those bird species that Holly mentioned is that they're not fussy. They're nothing like most of our native species. They will use an enormous hollow and they will just fill it with litter and leaves and grass and a whole bunch of manky stuff until they get it to the dimensions they want. So they're really, really adaptable. It's really critical if you've got those species about that and you're wanting to do any sort of habitat augmentation project to really have some strategy in place for combating them. And whether I would suggest that it should be a combination of factors. It's not just baffles. It might be that you need to be able to maintain those boxes and pull out that nesting material as it's put in there and just continue to deter them.
Now, we've heard stated many times in the discussion so far, monitoring the nest box, monitoring the hollow. What is monitoring? Is it standing 50 feet away with your binoculars and watching what comes in and out, or is it interventionist management? Who wants to take that one on board?
I think it's a bit of both, really. I think we have to remember. Oh, is this my line that's incredibly feedbacky?
No, it's I think I've muted Mick again. I
Okay,
think it's
sorry.
I think it's Malcolm's internet. Thanks, Malcolm.
Sorry. So as I was saying, I think it's a combination of multiple strategies. So remember, if we're talking birds, we're talking using nest boxes for breeding, birds are quite sensitive during breeding season. So we don't want to get up in their face constantly and, climbing ladders and peeking in, and because the birds will quickly decide that this is just too risky and too stressful an endeavour to use a nest box if it's being inspected way too often. There's great technology around now and there's lots of people who've been able to, set up wildlife cams that can keep an eye on things in a nest box from a distance. And so explore those tools. You can have something set up in your backyard and keep an eye on things that way. Otherwise, keeping your distance and just being aware of what's coming and going from the nest box without having to get too close is great, because we do intervene when we get to a point where there are introduced birds moving in, because the only way to get a common miner out of a nest box once it's in is to physically go in and remove all that nesting material, and in many cases probably block up the hole, because they are, as Mick said, incredibly persistent. So you might want to try at a first instance just removing the nesting material and see how it goes. But if they're continuing to come in with nesting material, then you're going to want to block up that hole for a while and give everything a chance to cool off again. So you do need to take responsibility for a nest box that's your own space. You need to be watching and making sure that you're aware of what's using it, keeping a respectful distance for the most part, but when you need to intervene, absolutely getting in there.
Well, there's a really good opportunity to get Mick back in with an opinion. Mick, how does your nest box that you've been developing aid in monitoring, and how does it make, or what have you done to make maintenance a less onerous task So if a landscape manager needed to be having to look after, say, 200 of your boxes over, I'll just throw in a local council area, for instance, what tasks need to be done, and what is it about your box that makes it easier?
A couple of points there. Before, I'll just go back a step though. I think when we talk about monitoring of boxes and habitat, probably before you even get to that point, is to consider what you want as your objectives, why you're actually putting up nest boxes to start with. And for some people, that might be capping hollows that have come out and putting them back in the tree and experimenting and seeing what they can attract. For others, it might be that they want to attract those beautiful but very common species to their backyard, and perhaps even educate their kids. And they're both good, valid reasons, but understand why you're doing it first, and then put in a bit of a monitoring strategy beyond that. And it can be as simple as, if you're putting up boxes in your backyard, you might just sit out and have a cup of tea in the morning and monitor what's happening, what's the goings on. It doesn't need to be complex. In terms of our Habitech boxes, one of the things that we put in there is that it has both the top and the base screw-in attachments. So if you find that you're getting starlings or miners and they're building up a huge volume of nest material in there, you can actually get up and just unscrew the base, drop it all out, screw it back in, and away you go. You've reset it. So it's really nice and simple that way. And the top being a screw fitting as well. You can easily open that up and monitor what's inside. We're looking and have been for over 18 months already as to how we can incorporate cameras within the nest boxes that are solar powered and have some sort of Wi-Fi or connectivity, so that you can actually have live vision into your boxes. And the beauty of using plastic is that we can actually just develop a new lid once we get that technology in place to have it sort of molded in to fit in there, and it's a ready to go unit. We're not there yet. Happy to talk to people that are in that kind of field that might have some solutions for us. But at the moment, it's the traditional monitoring sort of techniques with cameras on poles or climbing or visually observing. And yeah, using the top and the bottom entrance so that you can easily clean them out or see what's going on inside.
Do snakes get in nest boxes?
Absolutely. And tree hollows, sometimes for shelter, sometimes as prey, as predators.
Lucas is still with us, and as a working ecologist, working for developers and other land users, Lucas, I'd like to ask you what order of importance tree hollows might be for your clients. Are they well, yeah, give us an idea of what your clients might be thinking about when they are looking at rejigging land use, doing some kind of a development.
Thanks, Grant. That's probably a bit better.
That's better.
Look, in general, we go to a site, say it's a farm and somebody wants to change the zoning to build some houses, and we'll go and do an ecological constraints analysis. So have a look and say, what are the constraints here, the ecological constraints, and hollows are one of the big ones because, they're for all of the different threatened species that we assess in the development space. It's threatened species is what the focus is. It's common species are not really a trigger for any impact assessment. It's only threatened, plants and animals, or ecological communities, the broader vegetation types. So we'll go and we'll have a look and say there's a bunch of hollows here. You need to see if you can configure your development to retain them, avoid them, where you can't avoid them as a mitigation measure, then you might think about nest boxes. There's also, as a part of New South Wales legislation anyway, there's a requirement to avoid and minimise and mitigate before you can do what are called biodiversity offsets. So a developer might avoid a part of their property. There's a bunch of hollows in that section, or it's an endangered ecological community, that kind of thing. You say that's a constraint. So if you can retain that and manage it ongoing, and if they do have the capacity to avoid some bush, then you might augment it by adding some nest boxes in there. Any timber that's being removed to put houses in, you might re-emplace in the avoided area or the offset kind of area, so that there's habitat for insects and things that eat them, refuge and that kind of thing for fauna. But all the way, that's just from small housing residential developments and subdivisions all the way up to mines. Like mines could be removing tens to hundreds of hectares of bush in some instances, and they will need to in some instances they will knock down a tree and re-emplace it once they've filled the hole in at the other end of the mine, which is great. It's an advanced process of placing stags into that rehabilitated area, but nest boxes are obviously fit for purpose and a lot lighter and cheaper to move.
Well, it's good if the wildlife are still there. If the mine's got a life of 30 years and you're rehabilitating it 40 years after you've knocked the trees down, who's going to be still living there? That's the question. But
yep. We have to deal with that assessment all the time.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I sort of framed the question to you, wanting you to comment about the mindset of developers these days. Are you finding in your work that the clients that are engaging you have environment and habitat as at the forefront of their mind in the decision making, or are they solely interested in meeting the requirements of the legislation and getting approval?
Yeah, it's generally the latter, Grant. It's everything's got a dollar figure on it, and that when a developer buys a parcel of land, they look at the feasibility of it from percentages, basically. The land costs this much, to develop it costs this much. What will my end profit be? And that's how the big developers work. And now with biodiversity offsets, there's in New South Wales at least, it's a bit more we're a bit further along than other states in Australia, but that figure can be quite extensive, and the price point will then mean that a property can't be developed, and that is essentially the way that developers look at it. They look at it as a blank canvas. Can we make money from it? And if not, if it's too expensive, then they move on. Which flips it to the other side. Sometimes are the properties big enough that they can look after it for biodiversity? You're putting a price on impacting biodiversity. Can you protect biodiversity and make money? So that's a good outcome that comes from a lot of development. Offset ratios are often 4, 5, 6 times as much land gets put away and managed in perpetuity with dedicated trust funds. So there are good biodiversity outcomes that can be achieved if the price point doesn't make it feasible for a developer to build.
So, black hat or grey hat?
For developers, I think you've got a brown hat. You get the brown hat and the green hat, and our job is to navigate the middle road.
All right. That's a really useful sort of observation, Lucas. I think I know I certainly don't give the developers enough credit when they're trying to do the right thing. I should be a bit more forgiving. Dan, I want to move the conversation back around towards you a little bit as a horticulturist working in open space management, but this is also a good one for both Holly and Mick. If I'm the weekend warrior and I've decided to put a nest box up or an artificial hollow up, and I'm on a housing block, where should I be considering locating it?
That's a good question. I think that you're probably right that Mick and Holly are probably better to answer this question, but I reckon my answer would be somewhere quiet, possibly, and maybe somewhere where they've got a bit of a corridor. Maybe there's some food around, like a lot of a lot of hollow nesting birds are going to be nectivorous. So maybe something like a Myrtaceae family member, like a eucalypt or callistemons or something like that, or maybe a Proteaceae member, like a Hackia or a Grevillea. These are plants that nectivorous birds just love to eat from. So maybe also you could think about the height, like different animals and birds might like different heights. What do you think about that, guys? How far am I along the right track there?
It comes back to that point of understanding what you're wanting to achieve. So if you've got a target species, do as much research on that as you can. For most birds and mammals, or birds particularly, you can position the box on the eastern side of the tree. It won't catch all that afternoon sun so much, and it will remain cooler during the day. In terms of the preferred height, it very much is species specific. One thing that is important is that a lot of species, if you put a giant big box on a very small tree, the fauna actually has the smarts to look at the tree and go, that isn't big enough for a hollow for me, and they won't use a huge box on a small tree. So that's a pretty interesting thing to take note of. But again, if you're understanding your species and you're putting up a microbat box, they use hollows year round, as well as mammals. So it's good to put up a variety of boxes so that they can find different thermal profiles throughout the year. If they might be seeking that afternoon sun hitting the box in winter to keep them warm, whereas they'll select a different box perhaps during the warmer parts of the year.
So we hadn't even got to that issue that there might be one bird or one pair of birds or one possum or one group of possums that require not one hollow, but maybe a dozen hollows over the period of a year. And I think we don't let our thoughts push that far out because it makes the problem so much bigger. Holly, what do you think about placement? I was just thinking about little things like if you have a barbecue, don't put the nest box where all of your smoke and your fatty stuff that goes along with the prevailing wind, don't put it in that stream of the prevailing wind. Because
yes,
you know what happens to your ceiling if you've been making fatty things in your kitchen? Well, the same thing happens with a barbecue wind. All those little droplets of fat end up somewhere, and you don't want them ending up in the entrance of a nest box.
Yes, it wouldn't be entirely pleasant, unless maybe you're a kookaburra and then you know that there's some food on, potentially, that wafts in their direction. No, you're absolutely right. So, Mick's talked about it already as well. It really depends on what you are targeting to know the best place to put these nest boxes. And it's often really trial and error. What you think might not work, you try it for a season, see if it works. If it not, move it to another spot. Generally, as Mick said, keeping your box out of the prevailing wind and out of direct sunlight in the sort of the hottest part of the day is going to be really good, particularly with sort of timber boxes that fluctuate so much in temperature. Making sure too that there's drainage in nest boxes. Trees are not entirely waterproof, so the nest box needs to be able to drain some water out as well. And making sure that that's not your only resource in your garden, as Dan said. That if you're talking about sort of your own sort of private space, that you've got some resources available. You've got some food in the garden naturally that the parent birds can be coming and using, though they will of course be spreading out elsewhere. And generally in the quieter parts of the garden is where birds at least are going to sort of be happier to use a nest box, because it's a very sensitive time, and it's a time when the adult birds are under enormous stress because they are trying to keep their offspring alive and keep them fed and keep them away from predators. So you're going to want to make sure that you're relieving a bit of that stress for them and that they feel safe in your space. So doing your research on the birds, there's, aside from Mick's great boxes, there are lots of resources online where you can find nest box plans. We've got some on the Birds in Backyards website, though we need to do a bit of an update on them. There are some great sites that have got plans or books, or, you can buy kits. You can buy them already assembled and have them delivered to your house. There are a whole range of options out there, but you need to do your research from the outset to see what you want to attract, so the best way to place it in your garden.
Now we'll go around the grounds for say a bit of closing comment. But last week I did say to people that they could contact me and get the flowering calendar for eucalypts and a couple of other genera that I'd put together. Thanks for those people who did contact me. They'll be coming out this week. Holly, I will put some of those resources that you were just mentioning on the Bird Emergency website so that people can chase those up too. Now, we'll also feature Mick in the next Bird Emergency podcast episode, which is going to drop today, this afternoon. So you'll get the deep dive on Mick's particular process for the design and manufacture and the research involved. Mick, have you got something you would like to add that we haven't got to already?
Yeah, look, if anyone's interested in checking out the Habitech boxes modular system, I'd encourage them to tune into the episode that we recorded earlier in the year, Grant, which I believe drops this week. So you can have a much better understanding of the research behind it and what the things look like if you tune into that one. But yeah, I think the big thing for people to really understand is that not just us, anyone in this field that is working in habitat augmentation for hollow-dependent species, we, I think, as a rule, wish we weren't in these jobs. Protecting mature trees and revegetating now is the best thing we can do for all of these species in the future. And if we can help to bridge that gap and keep some of these species about in the interim until those hollows develop, then that's really the end goal for us.
Lucas, you're still with us. Is there anything that you'd like to contribute before we wrap it all up?
Thanks, Grant. No, not really.
Do you want to give your services a plug? Where can people find you if they need an ecologist?
We're based in Illawarra, but we work across New South Wales, not so much interstate. The company's called Eco Planning, and we like to focus on ecology planning and biodiversity offsets. So setting up private conservation sites is what I really like to do, and ecological monitoring is another key part of what we do, but also the planning stuff, the devon in the sandwich is impact assessment. So thanks for that. Appreciate it.
No worries. Good job coming up with that name, mate.
couple of beers on a Saturday afternoon, I think.
Great stuff. Thanks for jumping in. That's kind of what we want. Someone with an interest or sticking their nose in and giving us some really useful information. Dan.
Yeah, I got two things. Firstly, I want people to think about protecting their older trees if possible. It's not always possible. You can't keep every tree, obviously, for safety reasons and development and stuff like that. But where we can, try and protect old trees. Secondly, go and check out the Plants Grow Here podcast if you'd like to learn more about plants and gardening and soil science and stuff like that. Because, yeah, we've got 55 episodes now and they're pretty varied.
Fantastic. Holly, I know you were talking about a site where there were nest box plans and that there's some on the Birds in Backyard site, but I wonder if you're going to mention the same one that I know that are based in Queensland.
Oh, I don't know. So no, maybe not. The one I was going to give the plug to, besides my own, birdsinbackyards.net. So we've got some free plans on there for about 13 different bird species. I'd also encourage people to take part in our Birds in Backyards surveys. So tell us what is in your garden by doing a citizen science survey with us, including if you've got things in a nest box. We love to hear about it. The other website I wanted to give a shout out to is called Nestbox Tales. So Nestbox Tales, as in TALES.com. Alice has a fabulous website with a whole range of plans for birds, mammals, reptiles, nest boxes for bats, all sorts of wonderful things on there. So there's information on the boxes themselves, what to make them out of, how to install them. It's kind of a go-to and a great website.
Okay, well, I think we've about wrapped it up. Thanks for all those people who have been watching the live stream and leaving some comments, because that helps us drive it all forward. And we're all here just to do one thing, and that's to get people to do something, either in their backyard or in their broader landscape, to help the wildlife that's all around us. Holly Parsons, Dr. Holly Parsons, Birdlife Australia, the manager of the Urban Birds program. Dan Fuller, host, one of the hosts, the major host, half of Plants Grow Here. Do have a listen to Dan's podcast, quite different to mine, but if you have a green thumb or you don't have a green thumb or you would like a green thumb, Dan's podcast is the way to go. Mick Callan, are you going to be saddling up to do a PhD, Mick?
I've been asked this a few times, so no, I can't see it anytime soon, but never say never.
Yeah. Now, Mick, of course, is the founding director and the driving force of the nest box part of Habitech Australia. Do have a look at Mick's website or chase him up on Twitter. He's sometimes got some very useful things to say about birds. And Lucas, thanks very much for joining us. That was really great. I'm Grant Williams. I'm the host of the Bird Emergency, and hopefully we'll be doing this again soon. I know that Holly is very eager to talk about rodenticides and pesticides in the environment, do's and don'ts, choices, options. So that's probably what we'll get up to next. Just before I finish up, thanks. Yes, that was another. We're just reading some comments. People want to know about the types of nest boxes and bird boxes, where to put them, how to use them. So between all of our sites, you'll get all the information that you possibly could. Look out for that, thebirdemergency.com. Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks for watching. See you next. Well, we can... there we go. Well, I hope you got some use out of that. Now, before I pull the pin for today, have you got a question or a comment? Perhaps there's something you would like me to follow up with Mick and Holly and maybe Dan. And I made a note I have to get Lucas on to talk about the developer perspective with offsets and how things happen. But I really would like to do a far more garden-focused discussion with Mick and with Holly next time. So do you have questions? That was an interesting bit of information, which I'd actually forgotten, where Mick had said, hang a nest box on the eastern side of a tree in Australia. And I'm thinking that's probably going to be the same for anywhere in the southern hemisphere. But also, don't put a nest box on a small tree if it is sort of larger, significantly larger than the circumference of the trunk that you want to attach it to, because birds will recognise that it's not something natural and they won't use it. So that was pretty good. Yep. Any further comment or suggestion? I'm going to, because we finished pretty early, I think I'll save up the Greta Thunberg, I've got to get the pronunciation right, clap back at Andrew Tate until tomorrow. And tomorrow I think we'll run through I might leave that until Saturday, until New Year's Eve, the hopes and wishes and the best things that the past guests on the Bird Emergency had responded in a questionnaire I sent everyone. What they thought were good outcomes or the best things in bird conservation in 2022 and what they're looking ahead to for 2023. I think tomorrow I'll do another replay. Not sure which one. I'll think about that. And it won't be about hollows. It will be, maybe we'll maybe have a look at another one of the really early episodes that hasn't had a lot of coverage. And I want to say, if you haven't taken the trip and checked out Mastodon, and you're a bird nerd, I encourage you to have a look at joining Mastodon. The bird community there is really starting to grow to be something fun and interesting, and there just isn't all the rubbish on Twitter that you find on Twitter, and it's not broken. It's different. It's very different to Twitter, but today Twitter's been all over the joint. I'd love to be able to leave it behind, but with almost 3,000 followers, I can't just dump it all in one hit without building up the other platforms. So anyway, so question or comment before I finish up for today? I'd actually like to know where you're from, if you wouldn't mind letting me know. Where are you watching or listening from? I know what platforms you're on, but I don't know if you're actually in Australia or elsewhere. Because if you're elsewhere, I can adjust the next live stream to be maybe a more friendly time for you. I'll just hang on a minute for that. Also want to say it's been fantastic. I don't like sort of going through statistics and all that kind of stuff, but I got to say that the amount of plays that people are going back and going into the archives and checking out older episodes, and I'm promoting them on Mastodon, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people diving in each day, and I love that, and really Europe centric as well as the US and Australia, which I love. I really like to see new people finding the show, and especially finding the old episodes. You know, some of these things I recorded in 2017 and 2018, so it's great that people are still finding them and listening, and hopefully taking some action, supporting people who are working in bird conservation, and maybe getting enthusiastic, or maybe just picking up a pair of binoculars or a camera and getting out and enjoying it. Hello, latecomer. Nice to see you. We're about to wrap up, but have you got a comment, a thought, a request for what any of these replays that I'm doing, or subject material for the next little while? I did note that New Year's Eve, I'm not sure what time yet, I will do a bit of a recap on the year just gone and the year that's coming up, some of the things I would like to see happen, and go over the responses to the questionnaire that I sent out to everybody for past guests for their conservation highlight for 2022 and what they're most looking forward to for 2023. So I can tell you I will be streaming tomorrow at the same time. I will be replaying something. It won't be one of the Hollow episodes because I think we've done all of those, but we might do another one that was more garden focused that Holly and I and maybe Dan did, or maybe we'll do one of the Daryl Jones episodes about reconnecting fragmented habitats in the urban space. You tell me, what would you prefer? Or would you like me to go back to, maybe one of the first 10 or the first 20 episodes that I did for the bird emergency? I'm open for suggestions. New Year's Eve, whichever time it is, it will be a bit more chatty about the year in review and what's coming up, and talking about the survey that I sent out to past guests and their thoughts, talking about their thoughts rather than my thoughts. There we are. G'day, Stan. Are you back from the beach? How did it all go? I did enjoy seeing your posts on the Twitter, and I haven't really dived into the YouTube. Haven't really had time this week, but we'll get back into that next week. We had a good little thing on Twitter. Actually, I might go into that because that might be easy for me to find. For your bird ID nerds, where are we? Here we are. I'll get this thread up in Twitter, and we can. This is what I like about Twitter. Let me just get this up. Share the screen, share the tab, and here we go, Twitter. Okay. So we had a good look. Regular contributor, friend of the show, Mo Foster here on Twitter, posted these photos and asked for an ID, and some people jumped in very quickly with brown falcon. Now that's the flying shot. You just see on this side, on the left there, what it was. So let's go through the. So there's my thought there, brown goshawk vibes, but I couldn't really see it well on the phone when I was having a look for breakfast. Mon commented long tail yellow legs. I missed that one. I wish I could see the middle toe. Yeah, I didn't actually see that tweet right at the start. Ricky had said sparrowhawk or goshawk, good rule of thumb. I'm missing a few of the other replies, I think, aren't I? Let's go right into here. There we are. Deb played around a bit with the contrast. Thought it might have been a black kite. Here we are. Not a forked tail. Well, this is what I like about. Here we go. Now, this was the thing that got me thinking. Gerg, who I'm thinking is probably a Greg, noticed the teardrop and thought it was a brown falcon. But brown falcons to me are really laconic when you see them. And I didn't think it was a brown falcon. So I wanted people to weigh in. Mon said it was a bird sitting and watching for about 5 minutes until it swooped down into the shrubbery. Now, I haven't seen brown falcons heading into shrubbery. So that was another shot that Mon had up there. But Sean weighed in. Sean Dooley, Twitchathon. So definitely goshawk, sparrowhawk, which I thought. But it did look less chonky than I would have opted for a brown goshawk straight away. So, but yeah, gave me brown falcon vibes. It gave me brown goshawk vibes. And then we had a suggestion to use Google Pixel, Google Lens, or whatever it's called. Yeah. Okay, so that was really all I wanted to talk about with that. But that's one of the reasons why I really like Bird Twitter, and I'm hoping that Bird. Here we are. There we are. Yeah, it's the legs. The thing that I usually look for with the brown falcon, it just looks. I think I said it looks a bit like the stoner of the raptors. You know, it's always a lot more casual. It doesn't attack prey in the same way that a goshawk or a sparrowhawk does, and that picture in the shrubbery with the tail, which is let me get it up. This one here. Come up. Where are we? Even though you can't see much in that, I wouldn't have thought that was a brown falcon doing that. That's just far more likely to see them on a fence post. Yeah, Stan, that's really the thing. I wouldn't make a call based on what I saw, whether it was a sparrowhawk or a goshawk, but it just looked to me to be a juvenile brown goshawk. But I wouldn't bet the farm on whether it was a sparrowhawk or a goshawk just on those on those shots. I think both Ricky Coughlin and Sean Dooley, whose opinions on ID I respect, said it's one of those two. So I'll go with that. Stan thinks since you're having a bit to you say, you're jumping in to the chat. Have you got a suggestion? What would you like me to replay tomorrow? Maybe one of the early, top 10 or first 10 or first 20 of the Bird Emergency episodes, or would you like maybe one of the later ones that focuses more on the, maybe with the Monday with Holly style, maybe the one with Daryl Jones about connecting fragmented habitats in the neighbourhood, or I don't know what else, or where Holly and I just sort of talked more about creating a bird-friendly garden. Tell me, what do you think would be the best one for tomorrow? And then New Year's Eve will be definitely a bit more of a chat, going over the survey and perhaps some of the feedback that I've been getting, and we might talk about what some of the most popular episodes. I mean, New Year's Eve's a good time to look back on things, so we might talk about which episodes have been the most popular, and I might talk about the ones which I thought were really, really good and maybe haven't had the traction that have come up. So I don't know. You tell me, and let's see. We've got Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch all watching at the moment. So give me an idea. Bird-friendly garden. Yeah, we've got a couple of good episodes that we've done with that, and certainly I'll be creating a lot more of that content in the next year, Stan, in 2023. The Habitat Gardening channel will come up, and I'll run for at least the first 6 months. We'll dual stream to Bird Emergency and Habitat Gardening, and then over time all the gardening stuff will move into Habitat Gardening with Grant. So I'll promote that a bit more over the next little while. Okay, well then, bird-friendly gardening it is for tomorrow. You've cast that vote. Are you able to join in tomorrow, or Stan, or do you? Is New Year's Eve when you're back on back being able to get involved? I don't want to do something that you really want to see if you're busy, but yeah, I will stream at the same time tomorrow, so that'll be midday Australian Eastern tomorrow, and New Year's Eve. You never know, I might do a couple of different streams over the time, just to try and hit a few different time zones around the world. I might do a fairy wren sort of arc, because we've got a couple of episodes. We've got three specifically fairy wren episodes, so we might do a fairy wren arc. We've done an owl arc recently, powerful owl arc, and I might do a penguin arc as well, and a curlew arc. Gee, we've got a lot. Oh, and kakapo. I think the Andrew Digby kakapo episode should be resurfaced as well. They're my suggestions. What have we got? Yeah, Mastodon's been great, hasn't it? I'm really appreciating it. I'm finding I'm getting to a lot of new people on Mastodon. Still working out how how to follow, or how to see, how to actually see the material I want to see without seeing piles too much. That's a bit of a problem. So I'm sticking more with following the notifications, and we need to make sure we're following each other. Which Reddits are you getting into, Stan? I tend not to have time to get into Reddit. By the time I've watched all the YouTube that I want to watch and caught up with, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and I don't get into Reddit as much as I would like. Maybe because I haven't found the right subreddits to follow. I also check out Quora as well, and there's never enough time in the day, is there? Never enough time in the day. Let me just unshare that. We'll go back to there. So, and I'll save up the Greta Thunberg clapback with Andrew Tate until tomorrow as well. I've got another notification on Twitter. Let's see if that's a good one. Another one about Greta Thunberg that I had talked about this morning. That tweet about the goshawk, whether it was a goshawk or definitely that was popular. Isn't that an interesting thing when you're not on Twitter? Yeah, I must say, I haven't dumped Twitter yet because in terms of penetration on the socials, Twitter is where most of my followers still are. But Mastodon's growing quickly, and I'm enjoying that. Actually, I don't even know how many followers I've got on Mastodon. Let me have a look. I don't even know how to have a look. I don't even know how to tell. But I can tell that when I post an old episode with the links there, had 500 downloads yesterday, which for an old episode of the Bird Emergency is just amazing. Actually, let me. There's been a dozen just in the time that I started the live stream to now, which again freaks me out because in the early days I'd be lucky to get a dozen in a day. I'll just check out again what we've got today already. Yep, the old episode I promoted on Mastodon has more listens today than the most recent episodes. That's always a good thing. Let's see what else we got here. That goshawk thing has raised a lot of interest on Twitter. That's really good. That is really good. Okay, well, I haven't got much more else to say today. Not doing sort of any homework, but I will be working a little bit on the website so that it's a bit more presentable. By the time we roll around, the year really starts again on Monday the 9th with the next Monday with Holly. But I'll do something every day. I'll do a live stream every day, at least one, right through there, and hopefully people can discover some of my favourite episodes and some more gardening focused ones, bird and wildlife gardening focused ones, especially for you, Stan. Okay, enjoy your holiday, and maybe if you're into cricket, watch a bit of cricket today. And I should thank again Mick Callan, Dan Fuller from Plants Grow Here podcast, Holly, of course, Holly Parsons, Dr. Holly Parsons, manager of the Urban Birds program from Birdlife Australia and Birds in Backyards, and Lucas, who popped in to that episode we just replayed. And I'll chase Lucas up to get him on to talk about, offsets. So I really want to explore offsets a bit more. I've reached out to some really good guests who have said yes, they'll talk to us when they get back from their holidays, be that the second, third, or final week of January. So yeah, thanks, Stan. Really enjoying the take up. That the new platform that Mastodon has given me. The exposure's been terrific, and look, I'm almost up to 27,000 downloads, and a week ago we were talking about being just passing 24,000, or that might have been 2 weeks, but actually I'm going to have a look. How long did it take me to get to 5,000? I think if I went to 2020, January, I think the first episode went out February 2020, and let me just go February 2022. So let's go February 1, 2020. February 1, 2020. And if I went to December 31st, 2020, so that's almost a year. What did we get in a year? Okay, in that first year, I didn't even get 2,700. Obviously, there's more episodes out there now, so it's not really a valid comparison. But the most we got in sort of a week back then would have been 80. Now we've got nearly 3,000 in a fortnight now. So it's just great. It's just really great that so many people are finding the stuff, and hopefully they're all getting into birds and doing something about conservation. Dr. Nick's putting up some great stuff now on Mastodon too. So thebirdemergency.com/Mastodon, you can find some of the bird nerd people that I am enjoying following there, and plant people, bird adjacent. That would be great. All right, that's about all I've got to say. Thanks for being with us on all the platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Fabulous. Enjoy the break, Stan. Oh, I just got a beep. What's that? Oh, great. Someone else. See, another follower on Mastodon. I love it. All right. Thanks, mate. Thanks, Stan. Thanks, everyone. See you later. Bye. Oh, I should say, shouldn't I? Thebirdemergency.com. I always forget to do that. And I always forget to do this. Let me do this too. I always forget to do this. Subscribe on YouTube, because I'm really pushing to get some extra subscribers so that I can unlock a few more features on YouTube. And, buy me a coffee. That would be ace. Now I'm really going. See ya.